Right, welcome back to Mostly Positive Reviews, and today we're going to be having a look at Ghost of Tsushima, however you pronounce that. That's just going to be my pronunciation from here on out. I just want to show you a few settings in the options menu here. Today we'll be testing this game with a 4070 Super. That again is paired with a 14600KF CPU, and that again is paired with a DDR5 6400 CL32 memory. Right, so currently we're at 1080p, and this game actually has a ton of options, right? So firstly, you've got multiple upscaling options. You've got DLSS, AMD's FSR, as well as DLSS. Then you've got multiple presets here as well. Remember, XeSS, I think this uses 1.3, so the presets do differ a bit. For instance, quality is not the same as DLSS quality. And then we do have frame generation, but what's unique here is we can actually use DLSS and then use AMD's FSR 3 frame generation, and it just works. Okay, so you can cater the settings to your exact needs. We're just going to be testing at native for now. We'll be testing without frame generation. We'll test a bunch of settings as usual. I'm just going to leave it on DLAA because you've got TAA, DLAA, FSR3 native AA, and XeSS native AA. So a bunch of anti-aliasing settings here as well, and as I said, we'll just leave it on DLAA. And currently we're on the very high preset. You can set the anisotropic filtering to 16 times. I'm just going to be using the presets so that it is easier for you guys to replicate these runs if you so desire. All right, so it took me a little while to actually get to this specific point here. I'm just going to start my benchmark run. This is very demanding. The forest area here, just a lot of foliage, etc. I know that there's a lot more metrics in the top left hand corner there. Well, it's not even the top left hand corner anymore. I just wanted to show you some CPU usages as well, so you can see how load is distributed amongst the different cores. But as I said, this is a pretty demanding area. It took me about an hour to get to, because I had 4 crashes so far. Don't know why. I played up until this point with FSR frame generation alongside DLSS to see if it works. It crashed twice, and then I also had 2 crashes with DLSS frame generation, so not entirely sure what's happening with that. I do get DX driver hung or device hung error messages, which usually means the driver issue, but I do have the latest Ghost of Tsushima game ready driver. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. But you can see we're actually not fully GPU bound here in this specific area. Our usage is sitting at around 94-95%. Not sure if it will actually go up to 99% as we usually see, because our GPU power is pretty much maxed out. But we're getting 100 frames per second here. Average is 107 frames per second in this pretty demanding area. As I said, a lot of foliage, a lot of physics here, so it's more demanding than anything I've come across so far. It might become more demanding later on in the game. I'm not that far yet. Alright, so let's just see if we enable the DLSS, if we actually get a performance boost. If not, that means that we are fully CPU bound. So another nice thing about this game is that in the options menu, it actually shows you the background. The game is paused, but you can see the wind effects, etc. So let's just see if we enable DLSS quality, what kind of frame rates we are getting. Let's just see if we actually do gain anything. We do gain quite a bit, right? We were sitting at 108 frames per second. Now we're sitting at 140. So it's, I mean, it's not that big a gain in these specific areas here. Around 20 frames per second. Sometimes you can gain like 30 to 40% with DLSS set to quality. You can see our GPU usage is now hovering around 92-93%, so definitely taking some load off the GPU, and I do think we are slightly CPU bound, right? So it is actually still, oops, there's enemies there. I don't want to fight just yet. I want you guys to see my poor skills. All right, so I just had to re-record all my frame generation sections. It's actually very, very strange, because I did not notice this at all. But if you, let me just show you quickly. We're getting 170 frames per second here. Now, if we're not in exclusive full screen mode, only in full screen mode, let's just, I'll just want to show you what exactly happens here. And this is how I recorded the video previously. And now if we have a look at the frame rate, we're getting 130 frames per second. So just make sure that when you do use frame generation, that's the only setting that actually has an impact here. All the other tests that I've done are 100% correct. Even if I switch it to exclusive full screen, the performance is exactly the same. It's just when frame generation is enabled, you need to use exclusive full screen, because otherwise the bump in the frame rate is not as great. So I'm just going to re-record all the frame generation settings here quickly, so all the frame generation runs quickly. So if it looks a little bit out of sequence, it is because it is. But yeah, you can see with frame generation, DLSS set to quality 1080p on the very high preset, we're getting 170 frames per second. Previously I was getting 120, 130, and frame generation made almost no difference to the performance, and I found it very weird. So what I did was I just booted up the game on my, not the capture card monitor, on my 165 Hertz 1440p monitor, and I saw that the performance was much higher, which was, I couldn't understand it. It took me a little while to see that the setting that actually affects it is that exclusive full screen mode, and now it runs much better. So 1080p, DLSS set to quality, and frame generation set to on, getting 174 frames per second here. So I'm just going to do a very quick run with, or very quick test with FSR Frame Generation. I'm just going to, I know it's in the way, so I'm going to leave it open, right? So we've got 185 frames per second there. And if we enable FSR3 Frame Generation, let's see what happens. All right, so now we get to 103 frames per second. So in my previous testing, I also found that, oops, wrong button. I also found that FSR does indeed run slightly better than DLSS frame generation here. And it's still the case, even though we are now in exclusive full screen mode. The game still, I mean, either way, the game runs perfectly fine. It's just now you can actually use FSR or DLSS or XeSS with FSR frame generation. And that's great for all the GPUs, GPUs that can't use DLSS or frame generation. So now you can use XeSS with FSR3 frame generation if you're on GTX 10 series GPUs, for example, and you'll get a very decent experience at least. And also if you are running on a 20 series GPU, GTX 20 or RTX 20 series GPU, you can use DLSS with FSR3 frame generation, so you get superior upscaling as well as very decent frame generation. All right, so, and now the flickering is gone. I had a lot of flickering with MSI Afterburner. The game actually crashed, and now that flickering is gone with exclusive full screen mode. So use exclusive full screen mode. Right, we're now at 1440p, and if we press R, we go to graphics settings, and it's still on the very high preset here. Just want to, don't want to do that, want to do this. So 1440p, DLAA, no frame generation. All right, so off we go. Alright, so let's just reset our numbers, getting 80 frames per second here. Sorry, I know the runs are boring. I just want to show you the more demanding scenes in this game, so that, you know, if you do get higher frame rates in this, you are pleasantly surprised, and not, you know, I don't want to show you the best performing scenes in the game, and then when you get to more demanding areas, you are disappointed. Right, so even at 1440p, our GPU usage is still only sitting at 96%, 95%. So we were probably fully GPU bound at 1080p, even though the GPU usage was not locked at its usual 99%. Right, the GPU temps are quite higher. It's no cause for concern, because our GPU clocks are still plenty high. No issues with that. Anyway, so getting an average of 80 frames per second. We actually had very decent lows and 1% lows there. So at 1% and 0.1% lows, I mean, 1% lows are sitting at 68 and 0.1% lows are sitting at 64. So very decent showing here. So I'm just going to enable DLSS quality here, and let's see what happens. Alright, so DLSS quality, and we gained around 35 frames per second, almost 40 frames per second, which is very decent. And now we are actually getting a better frame rate than what we had at 1080p native, right? So, I mean, depends on where you look. Over here, that's more or less the same, around 10% better probably. So 110, 115 frames per second here. Our 1% and 0.1% lows are also pretty good. I haven't seen a lot of stuttering in this game. The graphics do look quite good. I know that, you know, it's a 2-year-old game. I think 2-year-old. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. Whilst you're there, maybe just consider hitting the like button. It really helps the channel out. Anyway, the game does look very good on the very high preset. Even on the high preset, it still looks plenty good, and we'll be testing that out soon. So let's go ahead and just enable frame generation here, and then we'll drop the settings. Right, so now we're back with 1440p DLSS set to quality on the very high preset with the frame generation enabled, DLSS frame generation enabled, getting 140 frames per second. Very, very decent. Previously I was getting around 110, 120, very little gains over just normal DLSS quality. I know that the metrics are slightly smaller now than previously, but it's because I have to re-record all these DLSS and FSR frame generation sections. As I said, the sections without frame generation, those recorded perfectly fine. No issue. The performance is exactly the same, whether it's exclusive full screen or not. It's just it's a very weird but I'm not sure if it's a bug, but I've never had this before. I was able to use window mode or full screen mode, exclusive full screen mode. Never had a difference in performance with frame generation. I know FSR frame generation wanted you to run in a certain display modes, but anyway, so getting 150 frames per second average, 129 frames per second for our 1% lows, and 114 frames per second for 0.1% lows. So just doing exactly the same as I did earlier. Just going to switch over to FSR frame generation. The game actually crashed earlier when I enabled frame generation, so there is still one or two bugs. The game has crashed a total of 8 times for me so far. So anyway, hopefully they can sort that out. So standing still here, getting 157 frames per second. Let's see what happens once we enable FSR 3 frame generation. Now we're getting 178. So another 20 frames per second boost to our frame rate. So I'm only going to use the very high preset for the 1440p with frame generation. Previously I went down all the way to medium, but I don't think it's necessary now because we're getting 180 frames per second. There's no need for you to drop down the quality presets. You do gain, that was quite a big stutter there. Not sure if it was an autosave or not. Anyway, you do gain like 10 to 15% by dropping the presets. I'll show you at the end of the video. So this is actually decent play on the very high preset with the FSR or DLSS frame generation with upscaling set to quality, and you get a very high refresh rate experience. Alright, so 4K native and getting 50-ish frames per second, well, mid 50s. So the game looks extremely good. This is on a native 4K monitor that I'm doing my recordings on. My daily driver is a 1440p 165 Hz panel, and the capture card is connected to a 4K 60 Hz monitor on a second PC. So none of the recordings are captured locally, just to get the most accurate performance, and I had to pick that up. And now I'm seeing all these tutorials again. Anyway, not getting 60 frames per second here, but we're on the high preset. We're not on the very high preset. And let's just see what happens if we then just enable DLSS set to quality. We'll probably get like 70 frames per second, right? So let's go ahead and do that right now. So I just want to show you we're on the high preset, and if we just go ahead here and enable DLSS, I'll just use DLSS quality. Okay, and wow, that's a very big bump. in the frame rate there, 90 frames per second. This is once again more than what we had at 1440p native, like quite a bit more. This is actually very, very good. Interesting stuff here. Getting 100 frames per second, DLSS quality on a 4070 Super at 4K. I'm impressed. I'm impressed. And the game still looks exquisite. I've never used that word on my channel before, but there's always new things happening here. Alright, so getting an average of 95 frames per second. Our 1% lows are sitting at 80, and our 0.1% lows are sitting at 74. Very, very good. So let's see if the DLSS frame generation actually makes a difference here this time. I'm going to leave the metrics up. I know that they are kind of in the way, but luckily frame generation is at the bottom here. So sitting at 99, 98 frames per second there. Enable DLSS frame generation. I'm not sure if it does apply if you're in the menu. So we gained 10%, right? So from 99 to 108 frames per second, that's exactly 10%. Not a big boost in the performance or in the frame rate. You can't say it boosts performance because it does not. Anyway, so not a very big boost in the frame rate. Getting slightly more. Kind of disappointing, I have to say. So let's use these exact same settings and then just use FSR frame generation quickly. Going to leave it up again, and 106 frames per second. If we do FSR3 frame generation, and 127, so we gained another 20%, but I think the game might crash again purely because I'm seeing that flickering again. But you can see here that I'm just going to get rid of that before the game crashes. You can see that it's still recording in the background. The metrics are still recording, so I'll just show the metrics at the end of the quick run quickly. But you can see that FSR does boost the frame rate quite a bit more than what DLSS 3 frame generation does, and the game has no flickering whatsoever when MSI Afterburner is not running in the background. Alright, so let's see what we have here. 122 frames per second average, 62%, 62 frames per second for the 1% lows, and 60 frames per second for the 0.1% lows. So the lows are definitely lower with FSR frame generation than what it is with the DLSS frame generation. So if slight micro stutter is going to bother you, then just use the DLSS frame generation if that's what you want to use. Otherwise, I'd say at 4K, just use what's happening there. At 4K, just use DLSS quality native, right? So I mean, not native. DLSS quality without frame generation, and you'll get 100 frames per second, which is still impressive. Right, I'm going to switch back to 1440p. Then we'll just see the performance difference between the presets at native resolution, and then we'll call it a day. Right, and for this, I'm going to leave all this up, except I'm just going to do this. Now, I know this is not going to be, did I press the wrong buttons here? Alt and page down, there we go. So I know this is not going to be extremely scientific, but let's just see. Right, we start off with a very high preset. We are sitting at 80 frames per second. Sorry, I know it's a little bit in the way, but you can probably see. If not, I'll tell you what I'm doing. Very high, we're sitting at 81 frames per second while the game is frozen in the background there. High boosts that up to 102 frames per second. Actually a very nice bump in the frame rate there. Still sitting at 99% GPU usage, which is quite strange, right? If we go back into the game, okay, now we're still sitting at 99% GPU usage. Funny enough, we did not see that earlier. Okay, so 100 frames per second. Let's just go back into the menu here. So where's that graphics option? So high, getting 100 frames per second here. Medium, getting again another 10%, 110 frames per second, and then low, which I don't think you should use, getting 125 frames per second. You are much better off just, let's see if they're very low. Yep, 130 frames per second. Not a very good looking game, not a very grounded looking game. Just look at the textures on the ground. There's no ambient occlusion, no local shadow. The shadows just look off, and the texture detail on the ground looks kind of weird. And our VRAM usage is very low though, and 4 gigabytes of VRAM used. But if we bump this up to the very high, you'll see that everything just looks so much better, getting 80 frames per second. So I would just say leave it on high, on the high preset, and enable, where are we now? Enable DLSS quality. We can just do that down here. Upscale method, DLSS quality, and once we hit apply, we'll probably get 140 frames per second. So there we go. 1440p on the high preset, DLSS set to quality, 130 frames per second. Pretty good experience, yeah. Right, that's going to be it for this video. As I said, I'll be doing an RTX 2070 Super video as well, just waiting for the GPU to arrive. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, remember to hit that like button, please. It does help me quite a lot. And hopefully I'll see you guys in the next one.